Hi, I'm Dr. Marc Mednick. I'm a licensed psychologist and expert on family disputes. I've been doing this work for over 30 years, helping parents split up, doing what's best for their kids, working with entire families, trying to help them get through this very difficult time. A couple of things stick out. One is how lonely this can feel. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, young or old, whether this relationship is long-term or short-term, how you got together. The point is, right now, you may feel really up against it. Most people feel like they're making this transition completely and utterly alone. Even if that's not true, that's very often how it feels. Even if you have a support system around you, you can feel like you're the only one going through this. You don't know where to turn, you don't know what to ask, you don't know what the answers are that you're looking for. When you remove someone who's been your other half of your life, it leaves this chasm, especially if you're both responsible for kids that you're creating together. Everybody's in the middle of this messy time. You're not sure what to do with your kids. You're not sure how they're going to react. You're not sure how to handle this thing called a divorce. So that's why I decided to create this podcast. We're calling it Make Sense of the Mess. Each episode, we're going to take on a different question, some big conundrum that you face as a co-parent, some very important issues that you must handle in the early stages of a divorce. And we're going to break down those questions with the hope that you'll walk away with some better handholds. Specifically 4 C's: clarity, courage, context, and community to work through this very messy time. So here is how it's going to work. In each episode, we're going to take on some new topic, something that is timely for you, something that is really urgent and necessary for you to attend to, that you need some answers with. How are we going to do that? We're going to invite some real-life people who are going through what you're going through. We're also going to invite some experts in the field to discuss kind of the best things to do, say, not do, not say. And together, we're going to really plumb the depths of these issues so that you get a much better handle on what to do and how to do it. So this is not something you're going to go through alone. You're going to have us to take with you along the way. Buckle up and join us. So glad you found this show. Together, let's make sense of the mess. All right, let's talk about the talk. You know what I'm talking about. It's the talk you need to have with your kids about the divorce. This is the conversation no parent wants to have with their child. This is the conversation that keeps you up at night, that makes you worry and is agonizing. It's tough. It really is tough. And at the moment that it happens, if you get to that point, it's really still hard, no matter how you've rehearsed it, no matter what you're prepared to say. It's going to go sideways in some way, shape, or form, and I want to let you know that it'll go a bit sideways. Something will be unanticipated. Your child may react poorly. They may underreact like nothing has happened. My point is simply you can't prepare enough for this other than to create an approach to this which is sensible and then handle what happens next. So there's a way of approaching this. The first, and I want to make this really clear, what we're about to talk to, what I'm about to tell you, is not a substitute for your child being in therapy with a good therapist, or for you talking this over with your therapist and rehearsing what to do and what to say and how to say it. Get several inputs, not just mine. I want you to do that because this is critical, and also because this is an ongoing conversation. There is the talk, and there's what happens afterwards, which is more talking. So let's begin with the talk. Here are some things you can do to approach this. First, it's really best if both of you can make the presentation to the children. It's important for both of you to discuss in advance what each of you will say, preferably with a therapist in a joint session, where you're talking about speaking to the kids, what to say, what not to say, who says what. Second, begin slowly and dose the information. Dosing means giving the information slowly and deliberately with a few short sentences, each building on information from the sentence before. If you can, alternate sentences so that both of you are making the presentation. You say something, the other parent says something. Rehearse this before you go into it. it's really important to rehearse this. Your dad and I have something to tell you. We know this will be hard to hear. Your mom and I have decided we're not going to live together anymore. We just don't get along very well. But we want you to know that we both love you each very much, and that will never change. We know this is hard, but we want to make this as easy as possible for you. We made a schedule of times you'll see and spend time with each of us, and you show the schedule to them and where it will be posted on the refrigerator. You reaffirm the notions about their stability. We'll make changes to that schedule if that's what's needed, and we've made that schedule so that you'll have time with each of us. We'll still do all the things we used to do, help with homework if you need it, we'll have time for dinner, just not all together. You go on to say things like, we'll make sure that you get to all your activities, to and from school, and anywhere else you need to go. You'll be able to reach us on our phones if you need or want to talk to us whenever you want to. All of these things are affirmations that their lives and their stability is not going to change. It's certainly enough that you're getting a divorce. That is going to undermine that sense of stability in the short run. That's what's happening here. There's no way around that. But what you can do in this presentation is to be as affirming as possible, as reassuring as possible. That is the very best you can do with this talk. Now, you're going to have different responses here, and that may depend on the children's ages. Little ones might look confused or scared. They'll need a hug. They'll need reassurance. Some may dissolve in tears right then. Others will just sit there stunned and detached, or just drift off and go and play with their toys. And that may be confusing to you. It's like, what do I do next? Older ones might isolate themselves and close the door to their room. They may not want to talk to you. You'll have to give them space. The little ones, try to engage them. If they drift off, sit next to them and play with them. React like you might otherwise about something else that they're hearing that might be upsetting. Your presence is essential. Your capacity to be present is essential. With older kids, with teenage kids, give them space. If they isolate themselves, run away, I would suggest giving them up to a half hour to be by themselves. And if they don't come out of their room, knock on the door and ask of them if they want to talk. If they don't come out, knock on the door and ask them if they want to talk. If they tell you to leave them alone, say okay and check back with them later. If it happens another time, say, you've told me to get lost before, and I understand you're upset with me or you're upset with us, but we need to talk about this. These are the basics of how to approach the talk. I have to tell you, there's no science to this. The most important thing is to be deliberate, to do it slowly, to dose the information, and to try to make this presentation together. Let me turn the attention here to some things that come up along the way. It's likely if you're listening to this, you may have already had the talk, or you think it didn't go well, or you think you screwed it up really badly, or you had to do it alone because the other parent refused to be part of this discussion. Somebody may have already left the house. There may have been a major disruption and crisis already, in which case you can't go back in time. But I think what you can do, by way of damage control, if you will, is to always make yourself available for discussion with the child who needs to be reassured. Some kids will want to keep coming back to this. I don't understand why you and dad are separating. I don't understand why you and mom don't want to be together. I don't understand why you're doing this to us. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. Being resolute, being sure, trying not to dissolve in tears yourself, not being overwhelmed by the anxiety of the situation, but really trying to empathize, establish a sense of compassion for your child's point of view. They're bewildered. They're feeling like their life is shifting in ways that they just can't understand, nor should they be able to understand this. So it's going to take them time to adjust. Keep in mind, if you adapt, so will they. If you're overly emotional in response to this, that suggests to them that their life is indeed changing in ways that are so unpredictable and so dangerous and so unsafe that they won't be okay. It's okay to revisit these conversations. Here's the thing that I think some parents overdo. They keep asking over and over again, are you okay? Are you okay? You want to talk? You want to talk? If you want to talk, I'm here to talk. Your kids don't need that. That's more about you feeling that you need reassurance about your own guilt over having made this decision. Your kids don't need to be asked all the time for that kind of check-in. Every once in a while is okay. What they need most of all is reassurance, seeing that you're okay and that their lives have not changed dramatically, that they have access to you both is really critical here. Now we're going to talk about another version of the talk. Here I'm talking about what happens in the ongoing, sometimes it seems like a never-ending conversation to your kids about the divorce, about what's happening in a day-to-day kind of way. This gets to be very difficult over time because your kids shift in their adaptation, as do you. I have to say, some days you're going to have just bad days. You're not going to be at your best. You won't be as empathic and as compassionate, nor will you be as reasonable as you are other days, and your kids will get adjusted to that. But here's a couple of things to keep in mind about things to say about the divorce, what to say, but also what not to say. Here are the basic rules. Here's rule number 1. Never, and I mean never, talk trash about the other parent to the children. You can think it, it can float through your head, but don't say it. And here, let's be realistic. You're going to have thoughts that are vile some days, thoughts that are absolutely vile and difficult and even just vengeful. You're going to have those. I understand that. It's a divorce. You're disappointed, you're feeling betrayal. And what you want to be able to say to the kids is, you see, your dad is just as that's dirty so-and-so, and your mom is this or that. You can think it, but don't say it. They don't need to hear it. That's your burden, not theirs. Here's rule number 2. Don't ever lean on your children, mostly the oldest child, for emotional support. A lot of us have spectacular kids. I'm sure you have children that are absolutely spectacular too. Some are really competent at very young ages. They're emotionally connected. They know how to talk about difficult feelings. They know how to be protective. They make good decisions. They have great judgment. But they're not your therapist, and they're not your substitute spouse, and they're not your best friend. I cringe when I hear a parent tell me that their child, their teenager, is their best friend. They're not your best friend. They are your child. They need your protection. They need to experience you, most of all, as a competent person who can cope. They're not your confidant. When they become your confidant, they may step up and they may pretend to be looking like they're doing fine. They may even relish the role, but it's not for them. It actually is quite damaging going forward. Here's rule number 3. Don't ever discuss ongoing negotiations about the divorce that you're having with the other parent. And don't leave legal papers around for curious children to find and read. It's so damaging. It's really traumatic to them. I have talked to people in my office who are adults now, and they have definitive memories of reading legal papers when they were 8, 9, 10 years old, struggling with some of the words and the language, but getting the gist, and seeing all these things alleging the other parent doing terrible things, not paying money for support, not being a good person, basically. And it stuck with them. It shifted how they felt about the other parent for years. Many times they never talked to the parent they were living with about what they saw. They kept this in silence. It rattled around in their brain and it really affected them. So be as private as you can about what's going on. Don't talk to them about the discussions. That also means be careful about your conversations about negotiations. Don't think that when you're talking to your sister on the phone or your brother or your best friend that the kids aren't listening even though they seem engrossed in a video game. They're listening. Kids are incredible. They listen in this dual kind of way to what's going on in front of them while also simultaneously listening to your tone. If they hear a word that suggests something about the other parent, they perk up, they become extremely focused, and they'll listen to every word you're saying. Here's rule number 4. Don't discuss money troubles with the kids. Yes, you can talk about money being tight, and we need to make some other decisions right now and be a bit frugal, but they don't need to know that there's a sense of desperation about money, or there's resentment about money, or that the other parent is not doing their job, providing enough money. Try to keep them out of it, and never put them in the position where they have to discuss money with the other parent. It's very divisive. It's not good for them. I've never met a kid that likes this, by the way. They really feel trapped and put in the middle when they're in the middle of money discussions. It's the last thing on their mind. Let's move on now to some things to do. Do these things. Be reassuring. I know this is hard sometimes, but things will get better. That's the general gist of the information to give to the kids. If you can be reassuring and be a bit poised and relaxed in the presentation of being reassuring, that's good for the kids. They'll feel that you're on top of things, and they'll get a sense from you that, yeah, I guess we'll make it through. Second thing is to present a rational option to conflict when it comes up. And that means not just about your parenting with the child, but about your conflict with the other parent. Be able to say to your child with a straight face, me and your dad do argue, but we both love you guys, and we're going to find a solution here to this problem, whatever it is, whether or not they're playing soccer or going to dance, whether it's about whether they're going to have vacation time with you for the first 2 weeks of the summer and the last 2 weeks of the summer with the other parent. Whatever it is, you can find a rational option because you have rational options to offer. And that's not the same as kind of going off and screaming and shouting about what the other parent is doing or not doing. Kids really react to the guardrails you provide when you're rational, when you provide options that make sense to them. Here's a third thing. Show that you can be civil to the other parent. I know this is sometimes really difficult, particularly if you have a difficult ex. If the other parent is a showboat, they show up and they preen all the time. They're attention seekers. They're always drawing attention to themselves, and they're acting like they're on stage all the time. And it's always, look at me, or look at what I've done. I know how upsetting that can be to see and have to interact with. But that's probably one of the reasons why you're getting a divorce in the first place, is that they're like that. They're not going to stop being like that just because you're getting a divorce. Your civility, though, means that you show up and you're, again, poised. I don't mean like being like Miss Manners where you are doing rules of etiquette. I'm talking about having dignity. I'm talking about presenting yourself as somebody who does the right thing in the right way at the right time. If there's a concert for your kids, be willing to sit next to the other parent, or at least in the same row. Take pictures of your children doing something and send them to the other parent when they're not there. Do things that are considerate. That's being civil. Here's the next rule of thumb of things to do. Reinforce and validate your children's feelings and concerns. Develop a language of how to talk to each of your kids. It may be a little bit different for each of your kids. Basically, you want to be able to say things like this. I know this is a hard time for you, and all of this is confusing. Your mom and I are working on this to make this better. I know you're angry. I hear you. You can always ask your children, how are you feeling? You could always ask them, is there something else that you think I could be doing to make your life a bit easier? Within reason, that is. I'm not buying you that gift. I'm really talking about how you're feeling emotionally. What was your day like? Here's the thing. Make sure to check in with your kids just a bit more, not obsessively, but, nice, reasonable check-ins that you would ordinarily do in the course of life if all of you were still together. It's okay to ask, how was your day at school? It's okay to ask if Johnny was still being irritating and annoying in science class. It's okay to talk about what happened at basketball practice in the afternoon. All of that is really normal stuff that your kids expect you to ask about. But inquire about how they're feeling, about what their concerns are, about their worries. Let them tell you. Be curious above all things. Ask questions. I'm not talking 20 questions. I'm not talking overwhelming them with an interrogation, but it's just about being curious and concerned. They'll know when you're genuine and authentic about that. Here's another rule to consider. Foster a sense of self-efficacy. That means that they can impact their own lives, that they can cope. That's what self-efficacy means. I can influence my life. I have agency in my own life. In other words, tell the kids that you have expectations, that they're well-mannered, kind to one another, a participating family member, and that all of that is important, that they have the capacity to influence their lives, that they have responsibilities like chores and homework, and that they're not only responsible for that, but that's good for them and their well-being, that being kind to their friends, being fair with their siblings who are annoying, those are things that they can do. Be a kid. Go out there, play music, do sports, have activities. Your job is to learn and grow. My job is to help you get where you need to go. If you can reinforce that sense of their capacity to influence their own lives, they will adapt to these changes much faster, and you'll be doing your job as a parent. Now, here's a big one, kind of a big rule, and the one that some parents do better than others, but is really critical to master, particularly during a divorce. When you screw up, recover. Hey, Jane, I'm sorry. I lost it before. I sometimes get really frustrated. I'm fine now. I'll do better. It's not your fault. You don't need to fix anything. That's for me and your mom to do. Something along those lines. Here's the thing. Don't apologize all the time. If you're apologizing all the time, your kids won't take your apologies seriously. They'll think that you're just scamming them. That's how it feels to them. If you do lose your temper, if you're not patient enough, if you're overly distracted or you're frustrated by something, own up to it and then move on to something that demonstrates your competence in that moment. So you make the apology, you get right back into doing homework with them. You go right back into cooking dinner. You go right back into solving a problem or just being a parent. That's how you recover. Be proactive in doing so. Finally, be a good enough parent, not perfect. What do I mean by good enough? I mean the person who shows up, who's authentic, who's genuine, who's genuinely involved with and curious about the children's growth. You take pleasure in watching them learn something. Be reassuring. You're the parent who gives confidence and encouragement, not empty confidence and encouragement. When your kid fouls something up, you set legitimate expectations, and if they violate those expectations, there are consequences that are clear but reasonable, not overdone. That's kind of normal stuff. There should be consequences to errant behavior, and things need to be corrected. On the other hand, you're the parent who's very encouraging. You lead your children to be more relaxed. You show them how to be more relaxed. You're poised when it comes to problem solving. Hey, let's take a step back and look at this. Anything you would have done differently here? You could ask them things like that. You can engage them in ways that show that you have not just frailty, but competence. Your own poise, your own engagement, your own authenticity is really, in the final analysis, all that matters.
We are talking about how to talk to your kids about divorce, which is a hard topic.
It is, Brian. I'm glad we're talking about it too, because one of the things that goes on is that parents second guess themselves all the time about what to say, what not to say, what the timing is, how to emphasize a message. So this is something that we really need to talk about. I think it'll be helpful and informative.
Absolutely. And today we are talking to a young woman that we spoke to a few episodes back, bringing her back into the show. Excited to hear her point of view on this.
Me as well. This is obviously a person with a point of view, as we've learned, and she'll have lots to say about this topic as well.
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
One of the topics Dr. Mark has talked about is having the talk. When you think about having the talk, when you had to first tell your girls that you were going to initiate a divorce, what was going through your mind? Because I know that it had to be completely different for the 4.5-year-old and your 19-year-old, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So at the time, my 4-year-old was 2. And initially, we had moved across the country with the expectation that Dad would join us once he retired from the military. So we lived on our own already. So that was actually very, I think, easy with her because she was 2, she was young. And at that time, for the last year, she'd really only known it was me and her the entire time anyway. So it wasn't much of an adjustment for her. The 19-year-old, honestly, that conversation scared me more than anything else. And I think it's because I had been in her life since she was 11 years old, and I love her so much. We are so close. I was scared that it could impact the relationship. I was afraid that maybe we would no longer have a relationship anymore. And I was also afraid, to be honest with you, to face the truth of what had happened that she had experienced, right? So there were many times that she had been around before the 4-year-old was ever even born, where there were really bad, high conflict arguments, toxic things that happened in our relationship that she witnessed firsthand that were always very, very bad and very embarrassing, frankly. And in some ways, I was afraid to have to admit, like, I guess that finally I was leaving the relationship. And I can't express to you the relief that I experienced from her in that moment. It was like I told her what was going on, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Thank God."
Right. So I take it you weren't aware of what she was seeing and what she was feeling and how she was processing the conflict she was experiencing.
I think I wasn't aware of how much it impacted her.
Yes.
And not because, I mean, I think I'm a very smart person, but I think I was dealing with my own trauma for so long with the relationship with him that I couldn't even begin to think about how it was impacting her. But then when I had my little one around all the time, because the 19-year-old would only come out for the summers and holidays and, it was infrequent visits. But then when I had the little one around all the time, that's when I realized, oh my gosh, this is impacting them just like I was impacted as a child from my parents, the things that my dad did to my mom. And what may have been acceptable for me to put up with or try to work through is not acceptable for them. And I have to make that choice for them to give them peace and happiness. And I think my stepdaughter wished that for the longest time.
Yes. Has she been able to tell you how long she was thinking and feeling that?
Since day one.
How
I mean,
about that?
she has told me many times, well, he had a pretty serious girlfriend before me. That was also a really terrible relationship that she experienced. She remembers things about him and her mom when she was younger. And so for her, it's just, she's glad that that we know each other, that we have each other. She's in my life, but, she wishes I never had to deal with that.
Right. So this conversation, the talk, is an ongoing conversation that you keep having. Sounds like there are these multiple triggers that you've had, that the 19-year-old has had, and that you're trying to preserve the 4.5-year-old from ever experiencing. So the conversation is kind of an ongoing one about the triggers, about what the experience is. And embedded in that seems like there's a lot of sadness and loss. And that's rough. That's rough. So how do you think it's impacted the 19-year-old and her relationship to herself?
I think that she has worked really hard to build good self-awareness on who she is and her personality. I think out of fear sometimes that she's going to be like him. That's what she's worried about, that she's going to have the same kinds of issues that he's had. So she's worked really hard to build that self-awareness. And I also think that she's really learned a lot about boundaries, more so than ever.
And so that's an ongoing conversation that you have about maintaining boundaries, what's reasonable for somebody to do, how to assert herself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at 19 years old to be put in a position where you are making a decision on whether or not you want to have your parent in your life is pretty serious.
Yes, it is.
And I think I've been able to be there for her and really just reaffirm her that, this is her decision. She is an adult now, and it is her decision to make and no one else's. And no matter what she decides, that she's going to be loved and supported. And if she said to me tomorrow, you know what, I'm going to have a relationship with my dad, and that may impact me, obviously, if she does that, I would say 1,000%, I stand behind you and support you in your decision. I can't even imagine having to make that decision at 19, because I remember what I was like at 19, and I don't think I had the emotional maturity that she has. But
Yeah.
I think that she has learned so much from this process, and she's a very strong-willed female, and this is going to, it sucks, frankly, that it's going to impact her for her life, but at the same time, she's going to learn so much from this situation, and I think that she will always be really conscious of the relationships that she has in her life going forward and be very protective of herself. And that's the best I can hope for her.
Well, I have a piece of good news to share with you about this, if I could put a happier spin on this. If she's doing all this work now, as you're describing, and you're doing this work with her, probably the worst thing that you have to worry about is that she will delay the decision to marry one day, which often happens from people who grew up in high conflict divorces. They often delay the decision for commitment. That's not a terrible thing. If she delays until she's 30, for instance, she still has the opportunity to live well. The idea is to learn how to trust herself, to learn how to not let anybody treat herself poorly, learning more how to assert herself without being aggressive. I'm not saying that's an issue, but sometimes it is. When we start asserting ourselves, we go a little overboard sometimes, and then we calm down. But if that's the worst that happens, that's fabulous. If she delays commitment or even avoids commitment a little bit along the way to make sure that she feels protected and she's making good decisions, that's good living. That's really okay. As long as she can continually come back to you and process this, that's a pretty wonderful thing. You may not be her biological parent, but you're her parent. And she relies on you for advice and counsel and for comfort and stability. She's getting that. So that's the silver lining here. It's not so bad. Not so bad.
I am curious, when we think about having the talk with your now 4.5-year-old, she was 2 when you had to first start this conversation. And you're a very different person when you're 2 versus 4.5. So how has that conversation changed with her over the last couple of years?
I think it's kind of naturally progressed as she has learned more about life and family dynamics. So, initially, like I said, we were living on our own already to begin with, and it wasn't much of a big change. So there wasn't really and he wasn't visiting at all. So there wasn't a lot of conversation that really happened. It sort of just naturally, like, oh, FaceTime daddy, that's kind of how it went. But then as time went on, he moved closer, but not into our home. Then the questions started to arise. Well, why doesn't daddy live in our home? Do you still love daddy? Who lives in our home? Who's part of our family? I think those are normal questions that a child asks at that age anyway, though. They start to draw that little picture of their house and the little stick figures and identify who their family is. And so she's doing that, but with this understanding of we're still family. He's still your dad, but he just doesn't live in the home. And mommy and daddy are not in love, and we're not going to be married anymore, and that's okay. And she, frankly, has started to recognize this in some of her classmates. She came home the other day and said, oh, so-and-so's dad moved out, and they're going to be getting a divorce. At 4 years old, she knows. And she's like, but to her, it's almost, I don't want to say it's normal, but it's not as scary of a thing because she's already living through it. And so she understands the dynamic.
So what burden did it create for you to have to manage these transitions in the 4.5-year-old's consciousness?
A huge burden. And, I've kind of referenced it earlier that my situation is very complicated. There's a lot of layers that, we don't have to get into, but not only am I the only one who has communicated that, but I am certainly the one who's left cleaning up the communication from the other parent that is not always nice and not always accurate.
Is that communication about you to the 4.5-year-old?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Things like, well, we're not a family because mommy decided that, or mommy doesn't love daddy anymore, or mommy is, whatever the case may be. And while, yes, that may be true, I'm the one that filed for divorce. I'm the one that made the decision. And ultimately, it puts fingers pointed towards me, obviously, and there have been periods of time where my child has said, well, why don't you just love daddy again and everything will be okay? Why don't you be nice to daddy and everything will be okay? And, having to be honest with her and say, it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's not, yes, mommy decided this, but there's for good reason. And I want you to be safe and healthy and happy. And that's why mommy's making these decisions. And that's what makes it more complicated. If we were on the same page and we were amicable, I think it'd be totally different. But because we're not, it is so much worse.
Sure. Do you have a concern that as the 4.5-year-old becomes 5.5, then 6, then 7, then 8, that she will start adopting the narrative that her dad is giving her?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that's definitely a fear, because she'll ask me questions and it's like she's repeating things that he's told her, definitely. And I recognize that. So that's always a fear. However, I will say, one, right now, because the parenting time is not very consistent, I think she's recognizing that more and more. And so she's maybe listening to him a bit less when he's making these accusations. Right. And then second, she talks to her sister, and her sister is very honest with her about things and tells her and supports her and is basically almost like another parent to her because of the age difference. But to be able to say, you know what, I used to feel that way when I was younger, and here's how I dealt with it, and talk through things. So I think I'm a little less afraid because of that.
Yeah, I think that's great that the 19-year-old can step in and play that role and is willing to do it. It also kind of cushions you from having to be in that position. And it lets you be able to say to your daughter as she gets older, well, yeah, I know you've heard that, but what's your experience of how do you feel when we spend time together? Basically, am I this rude, rejecting, hostile person? So, you can trust her capacity to rely on her own experience as she gets older. And you could always do that as opposed to defending, saying, no, mommy never did that. Mommy, you don't have to even resort to that. It's more of reflecting back, well, what's your experience of mommy? Does that, will you tell me if I'm being mean? And I don't mean about being mean by not letting you have more screen time or stay up later when you'd like to, or have a snack when I tell you that's enough. I mean, like really being mean, like nasty and yelling at you. I mean, is that what our life is like? So no, mommy, I just, those emotions are very transitory if it's not part of her experience with you. So that's the best way to counter it. And it's unfortunate. It would be great if she had a dad who wasn't saying those things about you, but you've learned by this time that he's not going to stop doing that necessarily. That'll be the narrative. It just is not going to be a narrative that resonates with her because it's not part of her experience. And over time, what will happen is that she'll give up on the fantasy of the reunification because then it'll be just that. It'll be an idea, but her reality is actually better than that.
Earlier, you mentioned the emotions, shame and embarrassment, which were, light bulbs in my mind. I think that a lot of people can connect with those two emotions. Do you think that that is also what your 19-year-old feels about her dad? Is she carrying around shame and embarrassment about him?
That's a tough question to answer. Possibly, maybe. I think because her dad and mom divorced when she was 3, I think she was 3 years old. It's been so long, this has been her whole life that doesn't really impact her almost. And she has a great relationship with her stepfather, her mother. She has another half sister that lives back home with mom. So I don't think she necessarily feels shame or embarrassment about being a product of a divorce home. But I do think what is impacting her now is, and as much as I try to shield both of them from seeing any of the conflict coming from him, he's always trying to pull her into the middle of it. Even though she's gone no contact, he's always still trying to communicate with her, trying to pull her into the middle of the conflict. And I think for her, it's a source of anxiety and it is a source of embarrassment because she feels like, I don't want to deal with this. I've made this very clear. I don't want to be part of this. And I think she's afraid. She started this new life. She started college. She got a full ride scholarship to college. She's joined a sorority. She's making friends. She started her life. And I think in some ways she is afraid of maybe people finding out about him or him showing up and embarrassing her. I think that is a big fear for her.
Right. So one of the things that I would say to her is, how do you take charge of this narrative? If that's your biggest fear, how do you address that with your peers? What if you just told, the other kids in the sorority that this is a possibility? She'll find that other people rush to her side and create another island of safety for her in her college environment, just as you've created for her at home. And that's what she needs to learn to do for herself, kind of unabashedly, because he's the kind of guy who violates those boundaries. The fear of him doing that is ever present for her. I could share with you a little personal anecdote. When I was a freshman in college, I had not seen my father for close to 5 years. He showed up one day. I was a freshman. I was a full scholarship kid, as if he saw me the day before. And it was bizarre. It was mortifying. It was embarrassing. I had a hard time explaining his presence with my college buds, knowing the history. And what I benefited from most then was them rallying around me and giving me permission to set a boundary that was meaningful to me. And that's something, this is an unfortunate narrative that I've heard in many cases. So I think she can take charge of the narrative. That's one of the ways that she can learn how to protect herself. So she's not subject to that kind of embarrassment, because he seems to thrive on that kind of drama. And that kind of drama mortifies her. She wants to avoid it. And she's doing a good job so far. So why not take charge of the narrative and talk to your friends? If this happens, this is what I need from you.
It's really good advice. Building that support network. I like when you talked about that in one of your other episodes about building those key people to go through. And I think that even though this is not her divorce, but it is her relationship with her dad, that it's just as important for her to build that support network and know who to go to.
This is her relationship to herself. I mean, learning how to do that, it sounds like in your life you didn't know how to advocate for yourself until later. So that is something that you've learned how to do. This is something you can coach her up with and have her do now at 19. So if she develops that relationship with herself, there's not any man or any person that's going to intrude without the warning bells going off and without her being able to react in an appropriate manner to protect herself and seal off that source of strain. If she can learn to do that for herself, that's pretty good. If she can learn how to do that at 19, that's pretty good.
You're so nice. I really appreciate you saying that, truthfully, because it was so hard to talk about this stuff. It's hard to share. I've gotten better with it over time and not feeling embarrassed or shameful. Because, here's the thing. I'm a professional. I have an incredible job. I go speak at conferences, and here I was living in this abusive relationship, and it's how? That's embarrassing. I should have known better, should have done better. But I think what has been the most important thing for me was recognizing that for my girls, I wanted to show them that I deserve better, they deserve better. And in this process, if this helps even just one other person go through the situation that they're going through, regardless of how similar or different it is from mine, then that's more than I could ever ask for, because this is a very lonely island to live on, because we are all so different and we feel like our situations are so unique and it is so hard to talk about. And over time, what I've realized is it's really not, though. There is a lot of support, and sometimes all you have to do is just be honest with people around you and say, this is what I'm going through, and people show up and they love you and they support you, and I've gotten better with that. So thank you.
Good. How do you turn that into a single piece of advice, best advice you can give somebody who is in a similar situation to your own? What would you want to tell somebody who is in a situation that you were in?
Gosh, so many things. If I could give one piece of advice, honestly, I think it would go back to resiliency and really believing in yourself. Believing that you deserve better. It may be hard at first, whatever you're going to go through, but in the end, it's going to be okay. and to really just believe in yourself, trust yourself, love yourself. And in the end, especially with having kids, they will see that, like right now there are challenges with my child, and I don't know if she sees that I'm a good mom, but I am holding on to the hope that one day she will look back at all this and go, wow, you know what? My mom made the best decision for our family. My mom took care of me. My mom loved me. My mom did it all. And she'll be happy. She's already happy now, but she'll be even happier then. And I'm going to be happier then too. So believe in yourself, trust yourself. That's the most important advice.
That's amazing advice.
Good advice.
And maybe I think that's a good segue into the last thing we'd love to talk about is maybe something a little bit more hopeful and forward thinking. When you take all those lessons that you want to teach the girls, how are you going to apply that to dating, if that's even something you're interested in?
Sure. Super scary topic always, right? Okay, so I'll say, to be honest with you, coming right out of it, I was not interested in dating. I thought I'll just live at home with my cats and for the rest of my life be alone, and I'll be okay with that. And my cats, they're fine. They don't push the boundaries too much. They don't talk back to me. They love me. They're snuggly. I'm kidding. But I was afraid of dating. I didn't think I ever wanted to date. I also, really don't understand dating now because I hadn't done online dating, and that's so weird to me. And all of these things, it was like, how do you even put yourself out there? And then on the other hand, here I am taking care of my child almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there was no time for that either. But things changed gradually over time. For me, I think I became a little bit more open to it. She started spending a little bit more time with her dad, time with my parents, her grandparents who we lived very close to. And I kind of just tested the water a little bit to see, and I got scared and I came back and I hid for a bit again. And then I met someone, and honestly, as much as I felt like I wasn't interested in any of this, I have to say there have been many times in my relationship with him so far, and it's still relatively new. We're, less than really a year into kind of knowing each other, but there's been many times in the relationship where I have been able to see what I feel is a really good, healthy relationship and be reminded of what a good, healthy relationship is. And I think that's been important for me because, there have been times with my ex where he has really tried to get me back, and he's love bombed me, and he's, changed everything that needed to change, and He's shown up. And would the old probably just take him back? Probably, because life would be easier. No conflict, family unit back together, I'd probably just fall for it all over again. But I've been able to see a man whose emotional intelligence is unlike any that I've ever met before, and who is kind to me and respectful of me and understands my situation and is willing to be as patient as he needs to be for all of this. And I think that has been really helpful for me to realize that this does exist. Now, I'm not jumping into anything too crazy. I'm not ready for crazy serious commitment. I don't know if I ever want to be married again at this point in time in my life, and that's okay. But I will say that I know I'm happy. I know I'm really happy right now. And even with all the other stuff still happening, I know that I'm taking good care of myself, and I've met someone who treats me well, and that's the best that I could ask for right now.
When you talk about all these good feelings, do you believe that you deserve them?
Yes, and that has been really difficult to get to because I think no one really believes that they deserve good things in their life. Like, we always are so hard on ourselves, and I certainly have been very hard on myself. But to now sit here and go, you know what, I am deserving of this. I am worthy of being treated kindly by someone, and I'm happy to have that. It's a new experience for me. I don't think I've ever been in a situation like this in a relationship like this where I feel truly respected and cared about. And it's nice to see what that's like and to feel that, because I do feel that I am deserving of that. It's taken me work to get there, but I do feel that I am deserving of that.
It's work well worth doing. Good for you. Good for you. And it benefits you. It benefits the girls too. It's great for them to see.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Your story today is going to help so many people. We can't thank you enough for being so open with us and transparent with us about everything. It was incredible. Dr. Marc, any last thoughts that we want to share?
Yeah, I just want to share my appreciation for the time that you spent and your candor. This is hard. You've been on a long journey. You've been through a lot in your life, and some of that apparently predated the marriage. So you've turned a lot of what otherwise would be traumatic into something that is very forward-looking, where you could be present in your own life, present for the girls, and you can appreciate the success that you've enjoyed, but that you've earned. And it's really a wonderful thing to feel that for yourself and to see you doing that for yourself. So kudos to you.
Thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. And also thank you for all of your advice, because I'm a firm believer that even though I know I've come so far and I've accomplished so much, there's always still so much to learn. And as obviously children get older and things change, it's so helpful to have your support and your advice and to feel like I'm on track or I know how to get it on track. So I really appreciate that from you.
You're very much on track, and thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Make Sense of the Mess podcast.
It'd be really cool if you could spread the word. You know someone who could use this? Well, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review, but also share more with somebody about our mission to help co-parents feel less alone. Please share this podcast freely. That's my shameless plug. For more tips and tools about how to navigate this time, please go to makesenseofthemess.com.